Good morning. I'm Walt Bartman. I'm the founder and director of the Yellow Barn Studio at Glen Echo, and we're doing a series of instructor interviews, uh, instructors at the Yellow Barn Studio in Glen Echo. And with us today is Susan Hostetler. She has a long career as an artist. Uh, most of our instructors do have a lot of experience, and I think she brings a wealth of knowledge and she's a very exciting person. She makes some really great pieces of work. She's very experimental, and I think we love having her on our faculty. So, with that, Susan, I want to say good morning.
Good morning.
And how are you doing this morning?
Yeah, I'm ready to talk about my work with you.
Oh, good. Okay, so here's where we're going to start. How did you start? Okay, as an artist.
Well, I started as a child, I think, and a lot of young folks do draw and paint sort of naturally. And I grew up outside a city environment. I was in the rural countryside, so I used natural elements, sticks and stones and things like that to build my little worlds. And from there, I don't ever recall not painting or drawing throughout high school. And then I went to university specifically to study art, and I got a BFA. And then after that, I traveled a lot. In my 20s and 30s, I did a lot of traveling. And I did get my master's degree much later in life, and I can talk about that later. It's related to teaching. But from after I got my degree and started traveling, my work developed in terms of what I was seeing when I was traveling. So, I always did fauna and flora. And so my series from, say, being in Morocco was about camels and tents. If I went to Greece, it was about donkeys and the patterns in donkeys' blankets. So wherever I went, I would draw what I saw and what I felt about that country through its fauna and flora.
And so you grew up where?
I grew up in Indiana and Michigan, sort of
Okay.
back and forth between the two.
Okay. And uh, did you start your career just right in the beginning with art? I mean,
That's a good question. I started pretty soon after I graduated. I moved to California, and I think for a lot of art majors in my time period, there wasn't a lot of preparation for what we would do out in the world. So most of us who wanted to stick with art and make a living tried to find an art related job that would support us and also support still our studio practice. So I've had every kind of job you can think of. And soon after I graduated, I ended up coming back to the Midwest because I got a grant, Tiffany Foundation grant, to study hand paper making at Twin Rocker in Indiana. Twin Rocker Handmade Papers, started by two artists from Detroit. And I learned a lot there. And when I started my travels, I ended up in Germany, and my boyfriend and I together put together a paper mill. That was a huge endeavor that our 25-year-old brains could not really comprehend until we were in the middle of it. It's also a lot of experiences, but so my skill as a paper maker developed, and also promoting that as a way to make a living. And it's very art related. So I continued to do my own artwork, and I did a lot of work based on paper pulp art, which some people will remember was a new and exciting medium way back
oh,
when.
I remember. I
Yeah,
remember. I made my own paper too, right?
there you go.
So it's that's one of the interesting things about how these periods evolve as to the kind of focus. You're
Mhm.
exactly right. I mean, uh, today, I mean, there's so many things available to artists now, material-wise, that you don't have to make your own paper for sure. But at the same time, there are quite a few that still do. The When you see yourself as an artist, talk a little bit about your work. What is it that your work is about?
Well, as I mentioned, it's fauna and flora, it's nature based. I've never strayed from there. But that's a broad domain, isn't it? And travel had an impact on me that altered what I was drawing and painting, even if it wasn't altering the subject. Um, and in the last, I will just say with animals, in my, if you look at my different series in the past decades, there is a symbolism from the animal who that I choose to do a series about is based on in a reason that's usually symbolic. Or for example, easy example for me to use is I did a large series on the wolf, and that was based on being in Alaska and a serious accident that occurred to a family member, and thinking of the wolf as the lone wolf, and then the wolf as a family and a pack. So I did a big series about that, and so there's meaning in the animals that I choose. In the last 6 years, though, I've become just really focused, I'd rather say that than obsessed, but with avian life. And you can see all the birds behind me. But so that came about. I've always drawn birds throughout all my art career. They've been peppered in with other animals. But the birds specifically, I started because I was doing a series on the Chesapeake Bay and the wetlands, and that was the flora series. And I was trying to become more three-dimensional, and I was using a lot of encaustic and layering. And what I made were really thicker drawings, not three-dimensional. So one day I thought, look, I'm just going to start three-dimensional. So I took some clay and I made the most simple bird form. And from there, then this is what developed. So now I'm focused on not just the individual bird, but how they migrate together, their patterns in flight, their formation patterns, their birdsong patterns. And I'm still working 2D and 3D. And you can see that on my website. And I'm very interested in installations and how I would love, I'm looking forward to having a room where I can fill the room, not just the walls. And I have done some pieces that hang from the ceiling, but I like this idea of utilizing the entire space.
Yeah,
So
it's interesting, your focus on birds. I'm going to talk about that. When you touched on symbolism, I think this is one of the things that when we look at our different faculty, there's some that are much more tactile, and we have some that are much more psychological, and we have some members that are more descriptive. Um, you're touching on the symbolic nature of your work. One of the things that I can't help but think about is that you chose birds here at this stage of your career. Um, and and what's interesting about that is that human beings tend to be planted on the earth. So the bird is something that can actually transcend that. All right. We tend to have to step on the earth. We can't fly. All right. So when we look at the birds, that's one thing. But the other thing that just came to mind when you just said that was the in Western art, the focus tends to be on the tops of trees. All right, we look up at the trees, or we look ahead, or we see a whole tree. But in the Eastern art, like in Zen, the focus is on the roots of the tree, and it's very interesting. But the way that's been characterized is that it's more transcendental, meaning that we look up toward the heavens when we look up toward the tops of the trees. And it's funny how the same thing with the birds. You almost get the feeling that you're really creating a transcendental symbolic statement about being able to fly, move into the future, because it's more futuristic that way. Um, and I just find it very fascinating what you've done here in the last few years, because I've been watching you and thinking, hey, you all of a sudden opened up a dimension that doesn't have a an end. It seems like it just can kind of continue to grow, and you've started like you said, the migration series or whatever. These are very fascinating statements in that they're employed in a way using you know an animal like the bird, as your subject. Um, have you always been symbolic in your work?
I'm sorry, there's a train outside. You said
Okay.
has there always been what?
Have you always been symbolic
I
in the?
I think I have, but it's not. It's a subconscious thought.
Mhm.
It kind of it comes out when somebody asks me why, and that's really what I'll say about that.
Mhm.
Um, and well, yeah, I'll leave it at that.
Yeah.
That's encapsulated.
Well,
Um,
do you see in other words, when you look at the birds, do you feel yourself when you're making these birds?
Well, I feel it's kind of twofold. What you have mentioned so far. I mean, the bird is definitely a symbol of that connection between sky and earth, which I
Mhm.
think is really important to humans. And I really think basically most humans need to have a connection with the wild. It can be a very small connection, a distant connection, but I think we all need something to connect us to the wild, to nature. And the bird is just, it's all around us. They even are in urban settings.
Mhm.
So anybody can have a connection through the bird. And the fact that the bird can connect to the heavens and the earth is an important symbol to me too. And I also think that it, I'm now also connecting it to climate crisis because the bird is a messenger, and the demise of billions of species, not just billions of birds, but billions of species in the last few decades is just just sort of takes my breath away.
Mhm.
And so there are lots of messages that show us what's
Mhm.
happening in the climate crisis, but they are bearing the brunt of it. So I think that in my work there's also that commentary, and particularly in migration patterns, because the migration patterns have been so disrupted for birds.
Mhm.
And there was a story recently, which was my studio mate sent me this because I had missed it, but about a painted bunting which was sited in one of the parks in Maryland. And it became this, I don't know if you read about it, but it became this exciting venture. It was just about a week ago. And there was a lineup of like 80 cars trying to get into this park because there was word that there was a painted bunting in the park. I
Yeah.
think that's a beautiful and magnificent story, but also kind of sad because the painted bunting was not really supposed to be here in winter.
Yeah.
Um, so so my work has symbolism in lots of different categories and commentary in those categories as well.
Mhm. They're all different types of birds. Just to ask you a question, looking at the scale of the bird behind you, um, do you think in terms of the scale of birds, meaning bald eagles or
um
osprey or anything like that?
Not really. I try not to. I do non-specific birds, but just in terms of the size, these are all fairly average bird size. And my first birds that I made, I don't know if I have any here, were pretty small. And I think it was 2016. I was invited to put a flock in the Athenaeum, and those walls are huge. And I think the wall space I had was 22 by 20 or something. And my husband said, if you do them that size, they're going to look like insects. So that's when I actually started making wings on them too, to show, outstretched wings. So every space I get to do an installation, something new comes about because of that.
Hmm. Color wise, do you deal with color in your work?
Am I,
Do you deal with color?
yeah, I mean, you might not be able to see too much, but these are, like This has a red patina to it, sort of a reddish patina. And I've experimented a lot with patinas. There's one up there that has copper leaf, but my original ones were just graphite, powdered graphite. And also I like wrapping the bird in strips of drawings. But I've done, blue
They're
and
all they're
yeah,
all clay birds, right?
they are all clay birds. And I am just now experimenting with porcelain and slip cast because our studio is above district clay. So I'm very lucky that way. And I'm also working with a glass artist at Washington Glass Studios. And oh my gosh, yeah, it's an expensive medium to work in, glass, but it's just so beautiful.
Yeah,
So
this
I'm looking forward to getting those photographed.
yeah, this is exciting, honestly, because I think it's like some of us are just. I used to teach sculpture, by the way,
Mhm.
so I'm very familiar with sculpture. I had ceramics. I had a background in ceramics as well. And it is the three dimension. It's interesting how you've gone from two dimension to three dimension, and this is where you are at this point. Do you try to bring anything like that to your students as far as understanding of how you think? Do you bring that to your students, or do you tend to? Um, how do you approach working with your students?
I think the most common denominator is flexibility, experimentation, and discovery. And I I always ask my students when they've come to the class, why did you sign up for this class, and what are you looking for? What would you like to learn? And I incorporate that into the lessons because I want everybody to get what they came for. And I also want my students to be open to experimentation and discovery. And for some, that is difficult. So I try to make sort of a mixture of, well, I'll teach solid, concepts, value or positive negative space or, you know, um, reductive drawing. But within that, I like my students to be happy. I want them, because that's part of learning. You want to feel that excitement within you and that encouragement. Being frustrated is not what I nobody wants to be frustrated. But so I try to get beyond that with experimentation.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's I think I feel like my classes are organic. They kind of develop, and they depend on who's in there and how they relate to each other. And that's the exciting part about classrooms, especially the size that I teach, between 6 and 12, is that there's a lot of cross current feeding, which is really exciting.
The thing that I want to ask you as well is, are there any artists that have influenced you?
Um, you know, there are, of course. I think in my university time, it was definitely Rauschenberg, and for me, Larry Rivers, because Larry Rivers did these kind of floating little patchwork animal pieces, which I think I was very influenced by my way earlier work. You can see it. And Pat Steer, um, I love her work, and Jennifer Bartlett. I love the different media that they use, especially Jennifer Bartlett. She just uses every different kind. She's very influenced by where she is physically. Um, and there's a crossover between abstraction and representation in both their works, and I feel like there is in my work too.
Hmm.
And that's why one of the classes I teach is about merging abstraction with representation, not so much going from representation into abstraction, but merging the two.
Yeah, Jennifer Bartlett. Years ago, I was really very familiar with her work, and that the book that she had, which was called In the Garden. Do you know that book at all?
Oh, I do, and I actually use it for teaching. I
Yeah.
love
So
that.
it's this is a great example of somebody who found an idea. I mean, she wound up being stuck somewhere and having to deal with what her surroundings were, and was able to discover a personal awareness that she was able to communicate to a lot of people. And I think, she kind of went against the grain, of course, and the fact that she did all different styles of working, which was kind of interesting too. Um, the So we're going to go on now, and we're going to take a look at your work, and we'll talk a little bit more about some of the other elements. But we're going to start with the screen, and I'm going to share it. Um, and we should be seeing a PowerPoint. Do you see it?
I do.
Okay, let me get this started here. Uh, the the first one about this
Okay.
first piece.
Yes. As I mentioned to Walt before we started this recording, I gave him a series of slides or JPEGs that relate to what I teach in class rather than my own studio practice. You'll see a bit more of my work later, but this was intended to show one of the lessons we do in class, which has to do with each student's eyes. And this one is in charcoal, but usually we do it in pencil. So you could go to the next one.
Okay.
This is an example of one of the techniques that I teach in drawing. It's sort of a scribble, quick sketch technique. And this is one of my pieces, as I spoke about earlier, birds, their behavior, and some of the song patterns.
And if as a piece, I really am intrigued by this piece, by the way. All right,
Oh,
I really think the gestural line that you're talking about, that rhythmic line that you use, but it's the contrast of its kind of delicacy as far as the line is concerned, to the multiple patterns that you're using that tend to be almost triangular. Those little dark shapes, almost tree-like. I guess they are trees, I would imagine. Your perspective is definitely not Western perspective, where we're using, say, a radial composition. This tends to be much more Eastern, where it feels like things are on top of one another. Is
mhm.
that something? Does Eastern art influence you at all?
That's a good question. I've been told that ever since I started, you know, in university, I a lot of comments from people about Eastern art, and I have to say I didn't study it. It's just the way it's just my tendency that things are floating
Mhm.
and everything's kind of floating together, and that's been a consistent trait of my work throughout my entire career. And
Yeah,
the little marks, again, it's interesting you interpret them as trees in the background because they certainly could be, and probably that's, you know, part of wanting some stability, but they actually are song marks. Those are the patterns of the songs.
I see.
My idea of the songs.
Very interesting. I mean,
Yeah.
it's when we talk in terms of the tactile nature of things, the thick thin relationship, the moving line compared to the stable line, the verticality of certain elements, uh, just even the positioning of things. You get the feeling of winter, of course, because of the white space. All right. Um, Living in Michigan, do you think that had anything to influence you from the standpoint of, say, snow or winter?
Well, this was kind of intended to be a little wintry, and the cardinals stick around. We see them pretty much all year round, so I think a lot of people think of a cardinal against snow. So that was part of it.
How did you, when you did the drawing of the cardinal, did you use any source?
Not for this one. I think what happens for me is that when I begin a series, I mentioned the wolf series, or I did a big camel series, I will look at I will look at the skeleton of that animal. I will look at lots of photographs and kind of learn exactly how to draw it. And once that's embedded in me, then I don't need it anymore. So with birds, I've just been doing them for so long, really don't need to look at a photograph. Um, but if I really feel like I'm not getting a particular wing movement correctly, I will look at a photograph. But otherwise, it just, you know.
That's a great point. I totally agree with you. I think that if you do it enough, all right, you learn it. And honestly, it's with the human figure as well as it is with the, animals. All right. I think
Yeah.
you get to know them, you get to know how they move, you get to know their shapes, you know,
Yeah.
and this is one of the things I think students need to really recognize that they don't always have to use sources for ideas because that replaces their own memory, you
Mhm.
know, and you need to be able to use that if you're going to get a piece as authentic as this. How about this one?
This one is has more of a volatility to it, obviously. And I was working with this was kind of a new technique for me with I put the graphite on the background and then it's a reductive drawing. So I'm taking away the graphite with erasers and water and stuff to pull the bird out from the dark background.
And is this a technique that you use with your students?
I do. And I find it a really exciting technique. And also, it's a great positive negative teaching technique in a sense. Um, and it's just a new way of working that I think a lot of times isn't introduced. So I want them to have new techniques to work with.
Yeah, we see the guy's monotypes and how he used the rubbing, rubbing out. Here you're using the eraser. You can see how you've handled this. You want to speak anything about the design at all?
You mean the composition?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Um, well, I used to do nests, and so I think I may have had another bird in that area up there that's a nest, and also or a nest form, and also a lot of times in my drawings, the nest has been interpreted as a tornado by viewers. So there's that possibility there too. I just wanted to show movement and also different positions, the
Mm-hmm.
bird positions. Yeah.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I have bird feeders around my house. I always watch birds. I
Mhm.
think that they're, as a matter of fact, I have chickens here, and
Mm.
they're really close to me. Actually, I feed them cheese. They love me. All right, just so you know, if you ever want to fall in love with a chicken, all right, the way to do it is to give them cheese. All right, um, but this is a beautiful piece because of its movement, and I think that that's one of the things that you're creating with the migration of a form. You're using a ceramic form for your birds behind you. They don't move. I mean, as a material, it's not a moving material, you
Mhm.
know but you create that feeling with it, uh, and it's less solid, and this is the same thing. You really create movement, which I think is a fascinating part of this. I like this piece a lot, Susan.
Thank
Right.
you. Thank
So
you.
yeah, and then this particular piece.
This is also that technique of reduction with a graphite. I put the graphite down, and these are all on Mylar. In the class, we use paper, which also works well. I like the sort of flexibility of the Mylar, though. There's something sort of squishy about, the graphite on the Mylar that I really like. And so this is a push-pull. And I often talk about this with my students too, is I feel anyway, you're building a drawing. So it starts out, you get your basic, shaper down, and then you're really building. It's back and forth, erase, add, take away, add, build. It's building. And so in that sense, I always try to encourage, especially in beginning drawing, there's no mistakes or whatever you see as a mistake. Trust me, you can cover it. You can go back. You can work it.
Yeah, yeah, and this is another piece that has a very unusual shape to the bird.
Hmm.
You know, it's not one that we would see. The typical one is the birds, the wings are up above the body, not below the body.
Hmm.
And this one has and I guess this is an owl. Is this
Yes,
what this one
yes,
is? Did
yes.
you do an owl series or was that
I,
just,
yeah, I have done it. In fact, I did the owl before I started doing this black and white graphite on mylar series, which I've been doing for, like I said, about 6 years, um, in my more painterly, and you'll see those later. I did a whole series of owls too. Post 9/11, I did a series of owls. Um, and yeah, yeah, so it keeps reappearing in my
yeah.
work.
And again, another very masterful piece. I like this a lot. I like the way you handle the dark tones around the bird, how you orchestrated the subtle value changes. It all works beautifully.
Thank you.
This next one,
This is, again, bird songs, a couple of birds communicating with each other. I have started using a sort of, I've started using stencils to create the bird forms because I want to capture a gesture. I'm not as interested in drawing a bird realistically when I use the stencil. And I just want to show the communication. This is part of that series I talked about, the interspecies communication. These two do look raven-like, but I do a lot of crow raven. I do a lot of more species that are not as close as those two are. And then the marks in the background are my interpretation of bird songs. And I'm starting to add a bit of color back into my black and white drawings, or graphite and mylar drawings.
so is this a recent one then?
This one is 2019,
Hmm. Uh,
maybe
the
20.
fact that you're working on white and using the white like Matisse did. Matisse, you know, when I was in graduate school, there was a big influence on me was to leave more white space than there was dark space. Is there anything about that here?
I think for me, it's back to that comment you made about the Eastern influence, the Asian influence. My work has always been floating. For some reason, I've not felt the need to ground, and not just because these are birds. It could be a fox, and it would still probably not be grounded, except maybe I might draw a line to show that it was grounded. But I don't do a traditional, background and
Hmm.
foreground, middle ground, background. Uh, so that's what I would say about why am I leaving that white. And I think that's part of the reason I do the graphite ground, is to just do the reversal of that too.
Well, the thing that's going on here, which I think is interesting, is repeating pattern.
Hmm.
And you see that in your work. You see the element of repetition, all right, just in the size of the birds behind you or the same kind of elements here. There's a lot of design elements where you use the repetition to work. And I think it's an interesting play, the movements that you create. Uh, there's almost a staccato rhythm in some of the elements that you're using in the background. So the music does enter into this. And like some artists, I think, like I try to make my work, one of the keys that I say to my students is that if you really want a strong piece of artwork, it should have music in it, it should have dance in it, it should have poetry in it, as well as it should be visual. All right. And you have that in your work, and particularly the sense of music. Has music always been a part of your work, do you think?
I think maybe subliminally, I'm not aware of, but this is intentional because it's meant to be their songs. And if anybody can go on the internet and Google, say a sonogram of birdsong, and it looks like sheet music, a really beautiful, interesting sheet music, which is, you'll see where I get it from if you look that up. Yeah, so I love mark making. Back before I got into bird songs, I'm always making random marks on my paintings. And I had a little boy one time visit my studio when we lived in New York, and he said, why do you draw such a perfect, whatever it might be, bird or fox or something, and then you have all these little things over here, little abstractions flying around? And I didn't know the answer to that, but I told him, it's because I've focused so much on this realistic or expressionistic representational drawing, that I need to like get all those extra little energy pieces out along the edge. And he seemed very satisfied with that answer. And I think it kind of, for me, when I was drawing more realistically, it made sense. But you'll see these marks in my older drawings as well,
Yeah.
just not as many.
Stylistically, you're not the same as John Marin, but there's a certain element that Marin brought to his work, which is line and shape, and that where he took the landscape and he really actually put it into the elements of design, which are line, shape, color, and using those to construct sound of the landscape as well. So you really, I'm feeling this kind of quality about your work. Uh, this piece,
Yeah, I say it could be a cousin to the former piece. I mean, we're talking here about, again, I'm using more color, and it has a little bit more filled in background, if you will, um, because of the way I've overlaid the bird song, if you will. And this is called Crow with Shadow. And so this has, is sort of that symbolic feeling of, we all have our shadows. And that was the intention here. And also just the stance of that crow, how they can be so sure of themselves and so confident. So I try to get a little bit of personality into the actual bird I'm doing. And yeah.
so you're the one that constructs the narrative, but that narrative doesn't start out uh, in your head to begin with, it does it? In other
Well,
words, this sort of a thought that's evolving. So
it, yeah.
how many of these pieces fail?
How many of them sell?
Fail.
Fell.
Fail. Yes, fail.
Oh, fail.
Yeah.
Fail.
Right.
Oh, that's where I get these little strips to put on my those are the drawings that get sliced up and put onto my 3D birds.
Okay.
Um, yeah, it's like anything. Well, we all have these, we all do drawings or paintings that we're like, oh God, can I make anything out of this, or am I better off just saying goodbye to it and
Yeah.
starting over? I mean, I think all artists have that.
Well,
And,
and one of the things I want when students are watching this particular video is to understand that creative process and how
mm,
creative you are, and how you see potential in even the failures by stripping them, cutting them up, and making them into something else. So
yeah.
you have that obvious potential. You see the potential in things. You
Mhm,
don't necessarily see it as a negative. You don't see it as something that prevents you from growing with an idea.
mhm,
And I think that's something that I admire about you, but I think that anyone who works with you uh, would do the same. So I think that this is what I'm getting from this interview really is getting to know you more and more about how you're thinking and that. But honestly, I mean, the level that you're working at it's pretty sophisticated, and I think students would definitely learn a lot from you for sure.
thank you.
Um, you want to speak about the eyes?
This was also part of that group that was when I was thinking in terms of what do we do in the classes. Like this is one of the assignments in my drawing class. It's just graphite and just finding some eyes and doing them. Usually we take photographs of our own eyes, and then draw that from that drawing, or even, in the mirror, the traditional way of drawing. But it's just more stable to have a photograph. So that's where these came from. And I sit and draw uh, in the class with my students. whatever they're doing, I'm doing. So that's where this.
One of the things that I get from you, all right, is that you're just not drawing eyes, though.
Mm.
All right, I know that this is just not an assignment. Okay, there is an interesting thing here that you're exploring with your students. I think students need to understand that. Looking at your personality, I don't think that you're just going through the motions of learning how to draw an eye. All right. Uh, it's perhaps like you said, when you have them look at their own eye, uh, they're getting to know themselves in a lot of ways. But do you get that feeling when you're doing this assignment?
I feel like I choose an eye for a reason, so I don't know whose eyes, I don't remember whose eyes these are, but I chose these two different eyes for a reason. The one on the bottom is just so intense, but in I feel a really attractive way to me. And I like that line across the top of the upper lid, that it kind of has that weight of seriousness. And also the placement, that one's on top and one's on the bottom. I mean, they're obviously two different people, but the fact that I allowed them to be that close together on the page, in terms of a composition, and one has an eyebrow and one doesn't. So there's a lot of things you could say about that. But I do like the challenge, because my work is very gestural, as you've just shown. It is really challenging, but also satisfying to sit down and concentrate and draw realistically an eye. I just find that very pleasing accomplishment.
Yeah. Well, this is, you can see the potential, and I think sometimes people um, misinterpret. They think they're just learning how to draw an eye, but there's more to it than that. You know, and underlying, you can feel the feeling, and you can feel the emotion, and just what's being communicated, the thought. All right.
Mhm.
Uh, Piece here.
This one, so now we're moving into before I went black and white. And this was probably on the edge. So I was still working on handmade paper, not Mylar, and doing, a lot of layering techniques, obviously, and, the background. And then I think I have some stencils, as you can see, put on here, use of, and then the actual stencil glued on in that lower right-hand corner. Have the bird image, and looks like some tracing paper of leaves going over the top. And this is, I use this as an example for the both classes, for the mixed media class and for the inspiration class.
Mhm. Yeah, and this is this piece has a very interesting reading, because it's more about nature, more about leaves, and uh, you get the feeling of the season, okay, by the color combinations. Um, but you're a good designer, and I think that's one of the things that I think is your strength. How did you get to be a good designer, do you think?
That's an interesting comment. Well, because I have never thought of myself as a good designer.
Yeah.
Um, it's just a matter of balance, I guess. And but that's really a great compliment.
Yeah, well, you are. I mean, this is the success of your work. It is the placement of things. It's really judging their size, their value, their shape. I mean, all in relation. Everything's relative. There's a certain sense of balance, imbalance. Uh, you know, just in the solidity and the transparency. I mean, there's really an interesting play back and forth. Did you study any abstract expressionists?
Um, I not thoroughly, because I do like a recognizable shape or entity in my work. But I do look at a lot of abstract, probably now more than I used to. I'm broadening my interest in abstract shapes within paintings. But Yeah, and I like the abstract, a lot of the abstract expressionists too. And I mean, I'm just thinking now of Stella, Frank Stella. I've always liked his work a lot.
Mhm. Well,
Um,
I can see, the contemporary nature of your work, but I can see that, the ties to some of the modernists and, particularly, even even though this is not Cubist, there is in synthetic cubism is there that play juxtaposition of elements, you know,
mhm.
and this is what you do in this particular piece. It reads beautifully. You capture the essence. This particular piece.
This one was definitely build a drawing. This one really started out, okay, the background is big. It's maybe 31 by 66. And I just kept adding, adding, adding. This was when I was trying to, make my drawings become 3D.
Mhm.
And that element, that circular element almost in the center, just to the left of the blackbird, which is in the center, um, is a collage piece that I made all these little cutout pieces of colored little cutout pieces into a circle, sort of the leaf shape, and made these tiny little leaf shapes, and then that got glued on. Um, there's a lot of layers on
Mhm.
this thing. Just
What are you gluing? What kind of glue do you use?
probably matte medium.
Uh-huh. Okay. And this is paper.
This is a very thick piece of handmade paper
Mhm.
back from my days in, making handmade paper. I
Yeah,
just can't
that
believe
that probably is pretty thick.
it's
I,
very thick.
yeah.
Yeah, it's actually three 22 by 30 pieces that I put together,
Mhm.
laminated together. So, but it's really thick and heavy.
Yeah. And when you made your paper, just to pick your brain a little bit, but did you? I mean, you ground up other paper is what you did, right?
No, I because I studied with Twin Rocker handmade paper, we did everything very traditionally. We had linters, which is a part of the all rag fiber, no wood fiber.
Okay.
And I experimented again, this kind of never thought of this before till now, but just I experimented with raw cotton to see how I could make cotton paper with flax and with different plant fibers.
Okay.
And there is Pyramid Atlantic in Hyattsville, Maryland, just
Hmm.
not far from my studio here. Um, I mean, they do all sorts of work with paper still. They are the handmade paper place to go. And of course, they have printmaking as well. But I just was fascinated by the different properties of the plants and what kind of paper that could make. But these would all be linters, which is you know from rag but honed down.
But would you buy it all ground up? I mean, obviously you'd buy it from someone.
As a small company, we would buy it in sheets, so it's basically pressed, so
Okay.
that it's easier to transport, and then you add your water to it
Oh,
and
okay.
then beat it. But you have to have a proper beater, one that macerates the fibers in such a way that then when you make them into paper, they interlock and make
Yeah.
a piece of
Yeah.
paper.
Yeah. That's interesting. I mean, it's complex. People don't realize it. That's why I'm asking you, because it
Yeah.
is a not a process. I mean, there are a lot of different ways of making it, of course. Um, and then this is the piece that was out of focus, so we'll just pass that. It was a close up, but
Yeah.
this is another piece.
This is another one I use as an example. I mean, this is one of my works, a whole series of this. These were on wood panels, and just again, many layers of patterned pieces. In fact, there are real patterned pieces in there for anybody who is old enough to know that we used to buy patterns for clothing. They were very thin tracing paper kind of stuff. You can see it in the lower left-hand corner, those little triangles and the black lines that go around, and it's kind of a creamy color. So I had these old patterns and cut up, and they just glued down very nicely and gave movement. And then I used gouache and then wax and oil, graphite.
Yeah, it's again, this is one of those design pieces. if we were to put this in a particular period, where would you put this?
Period meaning, what do you mean
Well, I
exactly?
could see Paul Klee.
Oh, okay.
I could see Paul Klee very easily in this piece.
You know, another person I like a lot is Kandinsky.
Okay,
Uh,
I could see
had
that here.
those floating,
Hmm.
Kandinsky had those floating pieces, and of course, Kandinsky was a musician.
Hmm.
So, um,
Yeah, I can see this. I mean, I'm looking at your work. I mean, I see Asian influences, but I also see this period. You know, this is a period of theoretical abstraction. You know,
mhm,
uh, when we look at the Bauhaus and a number of these artists that were working in the Bauhaus, this has that similar approach. You know, in the
mhm.
kind of transparency, the layering, the symbolism, you know, interpreting things as line, but also interpreting them as form. Um, yeah, it's and your color combinations. Is there any sense of palette that you work with?
Overall, for some reason I go toward sort of a gold background. I think one of the pieces coming up soon will illustrate that. And I feel like I'm always using this sort of ochre mixed gold background. Even looking around my studio right now, I see it. So I try to switch, and so I go over to a cooler tone. So this was probably a conscious choice of switching over to a blue.
Hmm.
Um, I think I was more involved with color before. Now I'm kind of, as I keep saying, sort of monotone black and white and just getting color back into it. But it's partly because of my use of the powdered graphite and graphite now that anchors me in that kind of, neutral area.
Hmm.
Just looking around the studio. But, I think I'm not that conscious about my color choices, except for the obvious fact that, we've all had training in color as artists. So I think it is intuitive, and we know to mix, the cool and the warm, that kind of thing, and
Hmm.
the contrast.
Yeah. Again, you know, the strength of design. I mean, the strength of repetition. You know, is you know, everything holds together really well here. Um, and now we're going to go to this one.
There's the gold. That's that ochre gold background that's so prevalent in all my work. And this is again is the bird with its bird song, and it's my interpretation of the bird song. So I get very, I can get much more creative with where my little song marks go. Um, and the bird is quite realistic. So sometimes I like to do this very tight, realistic painting of a bird. And it's a counterbalance to the more gestural ones.
Yeah, and you know what's interesting is you run that dimension in your work, looking at this and how you can use you know, the brush and how you can make something more quote realistic if that's what you want. Um,
Mhm.
the contrast here, I think, is between that. You can feel a real dimension, a real distance between the object and the background, both in just the way you handle the idea of the bird, you know, the hummingbird, to the abstract pattern that you have behind it. Its scale and that to the color even, you know,
Yeah.
works well. How do you? One of the things that I'm getting out of your work, which I don't know if you sense it or not, but everything stays within the rectangle.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you sense that, but that's what I get out of the way you focus on things. But when you're doing these big wall pieces, you don't have a rectangle. So does that enter into the way you design?
Well, when I have an installation of the birds, for example, well, um, my the way they congregate and form a shape, the rectangle is the wall in that case. And so I I'm I see what you're saying. Like in this piece, everything's coming to the edge.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, I mean, I'm more interested in what kind of a shape my flock makes on the wall.
Hmm.
So I'm thinking more about their movement and their pattern as a group as opposed to individuals. Is that what you're think? Is
Well,
that
I
what you're?
think what I'm going to say is that if things were moving to beyond the outside edge, it would feel like we were looking at things in a maybe more uh, you have convex and concave. You know how we're looking at things, whether we're looking in or whether we're looking out. Well, you have a real strong focus of looking in. It's much more introspective. When we
Mm,
look at your work, that's the key. I think that there's a strength to this um, almost ourselves. We're looking inside ourselves. In other words, we're looking inside an idea. If you understand where I'm coming from, I get that feeling when I look at your work. I think that's one of your strengths. All right, whether one of the things you discover is how people see your work. And I'm
yeah,
just giving you an idea of what I'm seeing today. And, emotionally and psychologically, I mean, your work really speaks in a very psychological way, because I interpret the bird as being like us. I don't know if you have that same feeling, but it's sort of like I can read the crow personalities that
yeah,
I've run into in life, okay? And I've
yeah,
run into the hummingbirds, right? You know,
yeah, yeah.
so that's what I'm getting out of it too. I'm enjoying this. I enjoyed. I think this is our last piece, if I'm not mistaken. Nope, here's the big piece. So,
Yeah, here's the big piece. This is the biggest installation I've done so far was 2019 at Inova Fairfax Hospital, their new cancer wing, Shar Cancer Center. And what an exciting project. It was curated by Shanti Norris, and there were 5 site-specific installations that were there. 3 are out in the courtyard, and it's just wow, what a gift to have this opportunity. And I had to learn to drive a scissor lift. Oh my god, literally a week before installation, I'm checking the boxes like, do you guys have a ladder for me? Usually people always have everything for me when I arrive, and I thought they were under construction at the time anyway, so somebody's got a ladder. But because of codes and liabilities, people can't lend their stuff. So I had to rent this scissor lift. I had no idea what to look for, how to, anyway. Yeah, so I learned how to jerkily drive this thing around.
well,
And
now
it
people
was,
get to Yeah, people get to see who you are. All right, that there's more to you, honestly. Okay, I think it's exciting to see where you are with your career and your work. All right, and I
yeah,
think really glad to have had you interviewed here because I think now you get a feel for what you know who you are, which I think is really great. Is there anything you want to say as we end this interview?
just thank you for this opportunity, Walt. This was great. It's a great thing you're doing for the instructors. You're always so supportive of us, and we appreciate that. And
Uh, Believe me,
and
likewise. I think that we have a great group. We talk about the energy of the studio and what students have, the opportunities they have to study under some really outstanding artists, who love to teach. I know your ability with your students and how they feel about you. So I think that this is another part of it that I feel everybody that isn't familiar with you needs to know. Um, well, with that, I'm going to say you have a good day. And to everyone watching, have a good day.
okay.
And thank you again for tuning in. And uh-oh, I just noticed that something happened here. I got stopped a little bit. Anyhow, we'll end it now and talk later. Okay? Bye-bye.
Thank you, Walt. Thanks,
Bye-bye.
appreciate it. Bye bye.
All right.